Over time, the data that I collected grew from a small tree that my father had scratched out for me on a piece of paper to a reasonably large database of hopefully well-documented names and events. As of the summer of 2006, my genealogy database consisted of over 2,000 individuals. This number may seem relatively low to some. I have concentrated my efforts on the quality of the data and not the quantity. As of this revision, my database now has approximately 7,000 individuals. And as the database has grown, so has the lack of proper sourcing. I will explain later how the database tripled in size from a couple of thousand people with the addition of just one very large branch. I did some analysis of the database back when the count was 2,000 people, and I found that 700 individuals in the database were blood relatives of my mother and that 600 were blood relatives of my father. The remaining 800 or so were related to me only through marriage or not at all. There was a group of some folks in the database whom I believed were related, but I had not yet confirmed or denied a connection to them. Most individuals in the database, which is approximately 70%, were born before the 20th century, and more than half the number of people in the database were born in the 19th century. Of those 2,145 individuals, only 173 were my direct ancestors. My parents and grandparents, 8 great-grandparents, and 16 great-great-grandparents were all accounted for, but at that time I was missing information for nearly half of my 32 great-great-grandparents. Going back 300 years or so, 9 generations back, I had accounted for only 28 of my 512 eighth great-grandparents, and to this day I have no delusions at all about ever being able to account for all my 1,024 ninth great-grandparents. Next, I will explain a concept that makes things a little more complicated. We each have 2 parents, 4 grandparents, 8 great-grandparents, and so on. Going back 10 generations, we would assume that we each have 1,024 ninth great-grandparents, which is amazing when you think about it. In theory, everyone's family tree grows exponentially. However, it is not entirely accurate to say that we have 1,024 unique individuals to claim as ancestors when going back 10 generations. It means in the 10th generation, there are 1,024 parental positions, and many times, these positions are occupied by the same person more than once. This phenomenon is known as pedigree collapse, and it simply means that some of an individual's ancestors were cousins to some degree. Take, for example, 2 great-great-great-grandparents on my father's side, Arnaud François de Backer, 1810 to 1870, and Sophie Françoise Calawart, 1811 to 1854. Tracing back through their family trees, we find that Arnaud and Sophie share a common ancestor, Hermes van Coppenole, circa 1510 to 1570, and that they were 7th cousins. Also, let's go back to Sophie's grandmother, Anna Marie van Coppenole. Anna's parents, Hermes van Coppenole, 1682 to 1752, and Marie de Jong, 1681 to 1760, were both descendants of the 16th century Hermes van Coppenole. They were 4th cousins. There are likely to be other examples. Suppose one were to look at my known family tree of ancestors I have identified. If it were an actual tree with me at the trunk, I am confident that the tree would look rather lopsided, with some branches only going out a short distance and other branches going much further. Each branch would eventually end with an end-of-line ancestors for whom I have not found any information regarding their parentage. The longer branches would be on my father's side, particularly those extending from my paternal grandfather, Leopold Joseph de Backer. What is impressive to me is that for Leo's parents, Auguste Vital François Joseph de Backer and Delagaume, when I published the first edition, I had found a total of nearly 140 end-of-line ancestors. 84% of the ancestors that I had accounted for were on my father's side of the family. There is a reason for this that I will discuss in a later episode. One thing to keep in mind is that when we say great, 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 etc., we are talking about the number of generations that separate 2 individuals, and that we must count both the number of greats and add 1 for the grand to determine the number of generations. For example, my 11th great-grandfather, Hermes van Coppenole, and I are separated by 12 generations. It seems that the majority of the individuals that I have researched and attempted to document are either descendants of a common ancestor, cousins, or spouses of those cousins. Cousins are 2 people who have a common ancestor but who are not related as a sibling, brother or sister, a direct ancestor, parents or grandparents, direct descendant, grandchildren, etc., a sibling of a direct ancestor, aunts or uncles, or descendant of a sibling, nieces/nephews. Cousinship is measured in degrees of consanguinity, how closely related 2 people are of a shared bloodline. Usually, when speaking of one's cousins, we refer to the children of one's aunt or uncle. Still, this relationship relates explicitly to one's first cousins because the common ancestor is one generation removed, that is, one or more grandparents are the common ancestor. Throughout history and different cultures, degrees of consanguinity have been used to determine the legality of a sexual interrelationship, i.e., marriage, and establish a line below which those relationships are prohibited. For many centuries, the Catholic Church had banned marriage within the fourth degree of relationship, third cousins and below. The term kissing cousins was used to describe cousins who by law could marry and that they were no more closely related than the degree of the fourth cousin. At one point in my exploration, I learned that the sister of Jacobus de Backer, my sixth great-grandfather, was an ancestress of the first wife of my fourth great-grandfather, Andreas de Backer, which means that Andreas and his first wife, Maria Katerina Josepha Malert, were second cousins. They were married for 4 years until her death, and I am a descendant of Andreas and his second wife, Anna Maria Vandendale. I didn't think that this degree of consanguinity was legal in 18th century Austrian Netherlands. As it turns out, this union was permitted, provided the couple had received a dispensation from the church to marry. A fellow researcher in Belgium provided an example of a dispensation in the church registry of the marriage in 1706 of Judoka de Backer, daughter of Gerardus de Backer, to Adrianus de Bruyker. Here is its Latin title, Cum Dispensation Pontifica Super 3 Degrees Gradus, a dispensation to allow cousins in the third degree, second cousins, to marry. When we speak of fourth cousins, fifth cousins, etc., we talk about individuals of the same generation who share a common ancestor but are not part of any other previously mentioned relationships. Second cousins are individuals who only share one or more great-grandparents as common ancestors and so on. For example, seventh cousins would be two individuals in the same generation that only share a common sixth great-grandparent. If two individuals are cousins but are not in the same generation, they are said to be removed by one or more generations, as in third cousins twice removed. Genealogy software products come with relationship calculators that will do all the hard work to figure out how individuals are related. Well, that is all we have time for now. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to hit the like button down below, and don't forget to subscribe to the Gathering More Leaves channel.